Hello, my name is Chet Gottfried, and today I'm going to read to you the first chapter from my novel, Thora's Dagger. And the chapter is titled Exchanging Daggers. Eugen stared at the ceiling of his inn. He never paid much attention to it before, but how often did he find himself lying flat on his back among the rushes that covered the floor? Yes, definitely a fine ceiling, and something worthy of his pride. Look at those beams, solid. The beams were oak, whereas most inns in Loweswater or Faringdale had pine. Eugen thanked his good fortune in acquiring such an inn, a gift for services rendered, services as a warrior. With his success, Eugen readily abandoned the sword in favor of filling tankards. However, his most pressing thoughts went into another direction. Eugen realized that no matter how fine the ceiling in general, or the inn in particular, that his most urgent decision had to be, should he roll to the left or to the right? Standing in front of Eugen was Gotrek, an oversized farmhand who had his legs braced apart and who held over his head a long bench, suitable for seating 6 people, and also made from oak. Its heaviness was lethal. To retreat backward would mean going into the hearth, and Eugen didn't look forward to burning off his hair. He was proud of his hair, a sandy blonde and wavy. He didn't want to be known as a bald innkeeper. That meant dodging to the left or right to avoid Gotrik's anger. But what did Eugen do to deserve the farmhand's animosity? Nothing more than suggesting that Gotrek had drunk enough and should ride back to his farm. One alternative was staying perfectly still. The inebriated farmhand was more than likely to hammer the bench anywhere except on Eugen. But could Eugen afford to take the risk? What if Gotrek smashing him where he lay? Wouldn't Eugen feel foolish not having attempted to move? Well, not if he were dead. So he had better make his choice. Should he roll to the left or to the right? What's going on? The calm, clear voice of Ratatoska rolled over both men, and they froze for different reasons. Typically, Ratatoska covered herself in weapons, but since marrying Eugen and their managing the inn, she eased up somewhat, tonight's armament being a pair of throwing daggers strapped to a belt around her waist. Godric answered before Eugen could say a word. "Nothing, ma'am. Uh, Me and Eugen were discussing whether I should leave now or have another drink first." She studied him for a moment. "Put the bench down where you found it, straighten the table you knocked over, and then go home. Farmer Olaf expects to see you at work early in the morning." "Yes, ma'am." Gondrick gently lowered the bench and then righted the table next to it. He moved both until they seemed to be how he had found them. Gondrick staggered to the door, opened it, and gingerly stepped outside. A blast of late winter air blew in while the door was open, but he quickly closed it after him. Eugen groaned, considered how he might avoid the forthcoming lecture, decided it was impossible, and struggled to his feet and dusted himself off. Perhaps a change of conversation would delay Ratatoska's annoyance. "I wonder whether I should light his way to the stable and make sure Gondrick takes his own horse. What if he takes Broadbeam by mistake?" "How hard did Gondrick hit you? First, the moon is almost full. There's plenty of light outside. Second, John would never let him touch your precious mare." Eugen remembered Ratatoska lecturing John. Well, correcting him would be a more appropriate word. From lackluster worker, John had become diligent in taking care of visitors, horses, and the stable. John would have run away if he could, but few people had any doubts about Ratatoska's tracking abilities. as well as a readiness in keeping promises or threats. Eugen admitted that his attempt to change the conversation didn't work. Perhaps now was the time to try the direct approach. Thanks for coming along. I appreciate your help, but I had the situation under control. Well, almost under control. I've an axe behind the bar, but I didn't want to hurt Godric. He's a good customer. True, he tends to be unruly when a bit worse for drink, but you have to expect that, given the circumstances. Eugen saw that his explanation wasn't going over too well. Nevertheless, he kept trying. It's a rough country, and farmhands don't need to drink much before making a fuss. Ratatoska walked over to Eugen and brushed off a wisp of straw from his hair. She was the ultimate warrior, even though blind, because her other senses, magical to be sure, more than compensated for her blindness. Her cloudy grey eyes with the fixed-sized pupils held them in place. That's the fourth fight you've lost this winter. The fourth? Are you sure? Were there others I don't know about? He held out his arms. I could use a hug, dear. She punched them in the stomach. Eugen doubled over and gasped for air. He wheezed. Was that necessary? You'd be better off with weapon practice instead of a hug. Come to think of it, you could lose a few pounds too, which exercise would accomplish. I had no idea how quickly a man could develop a paunch. You're starting to go bald too. Eugen straightened up, and with all the dignity he could summon, that you're in a foul mood tonight. It isn't that Gondrick threw me down. Something which might happen to any warrior, but not you, of course. The point is, you don't like keeping an inn. I thought we'd enjoyed running the Bearded Dwarf together. It has to be a better life than tramping around the countryside and assassinating people. Ratatoska said calmly, I'm not an assassin. I'm a tracker who happens to be proficient with weapons. Besides, the Bearded Dwarf is a dumb name for an inn. All dwarves have beards. I had a better name in mind, but you rejected it. Calling this place the Gilded Basilisk would have attracted way more people than the few who come here. It became Ratatoska's turn to take a step backward. You've got to be kidding me. After all the trouble the Basilisk caused, that name, including yours, would have been a curse. No one would come here. Anticipating her comment, Eugen had prepared a brilliant reply, but he was interrupted by what began as a thin scream and rose in intensity before being suddenly cut off. Eugen and Ratatoska looked at each other, the argument totally forgotten. What's that? He asked. Upstairs. They both raced to the spiral stairway that rose from the center of the common room to the levels above. The first landing led to all the guest rooms, which were empty, despite Eugen's best efforts to publicize the inn. Nothing here, Eugen panted. Next floor. Ratatoska reached it first, but Eugen was close behind. Evelyn! Ratatoska fell to her knees beside the young woman and cushioned her head. Evelyn was lying on the floor opposite what should have been a barricaded door, but which was partially open. She wore a night shift and her hair was loose. Evidently a disturbance had woken her from sleep, and she left the room to find out what it was. Blood from a narrow wound in her chest flowed freely. Avalon struggled to speak. She, and then she coughed a little blood and died in Ratatoska's arms. Eugen had knelt by the two women. He slowly stood up and looked through the open doorway into what had been a sealed room. Ratatoska had insisted that they bar the door because it led into the workshop of the wizard Jolsvin, who had built the tower they now used as an inn. Neither Eugen nor Ratatoska wanted anyone going through Jolsvin's possessions. The inherent magic was far too dangerous. Avalyn's twin sister, Geraldi, came down the spiral stairway, saw what had happened, shrieked, and ran over. She sat on the floor next to her sister and Ratatoskr and sobbed. Ratatoskr attempted to soothe Dorothy by stroking her hair. The sound of something either dropped or knocked over came from inside the room. Ratatoskr and Eugen exchanged glances. In the hushed tone he asked, "What was that?" Closest to the partially open door, Dorothy attempted to turn and rise, but Ratatoskr stopped her by taking a firm grip on Dorothy's arm. "Don't go in," Ratatoskr told her. "It's too dangerous." Eugen didn't have any such constraints. He stood up, cautiously opened the door wider, and peered inside. "It's too dark to make." Eugen fell silent on seeing a flash of light. A thrown dagger pinned his arm to the door. Ratatoskr was immediately next to him and threw a dagger that matched the trajectory of the one that had pierced Eugen. A groan came from the room, and then nothing more. "What's happening?" Dorothy asked. "I'm wounded," Eugen muttered. "Shh," Ratatoskr said and stood for a few moments. "There's a lot of work ahead of us." She turned to Eugen, who was squirming, trying to free himself from the door. "Stop that, Eugen. You're making it worse. Be still, and let me take care of it." Ratatoskr drew out the dagger from Eugen's arm with one sharp motion, and then the sensitive fingers felt around the wound. "It's not too serious, but I'll have to bind your arm. Dorothy, go and tear some cloth into bandages." With a hand, Dorothy wiped a tear-stained face and left them. Ratatoskr whispered to Eugen, "That will help distract her. Poor Dorothy, to come across her murdered sister." "Who attacked me?" "You mean, which person?" Ratatoskr shrugged. "There were 3 of them, but it doesn't matter. The danger's over. No one is inside." "No one has left the room, unless Jolsvin has installed the secret door." Ratatoskr shook her head no. "And there are no windows," Eugen continued. "Jolsvin valued his privacy when he was at work. You killed whoever was in there in the dark. You've forgotten about invisibility, but that wouldn't work against me. Whether it's dark or light doesn't influence me one way or another, as you well know. As for whoever was there, I do hope I've killed the wretch. Evelyn deserves that as a minimum, and much more, not to mention payback for your own injury. As for how anyone left the room, Jolsvin must have established a link between him and another wizard. You need 2 wizards at least to make it work. The link is a magic tunnel between here and somewhere else. That is uncommon magic, and the 2 wizards would have to trust each other absolutely. Consider, would you want another person to have instant access to your most private quarters? The 2 wizards must be friends, but friendship isn't enough because friendships end and quarrels develop. The trust between Jolsvin and the other wizard had to be secure. Since Jolsvin is dead, the magic must go back many months to when he was walking about. We know who the other wizard must be, which means that we're all in big trouble, and Hildy and Gare are likewise in extreme danger. Dorothy returned, handed the cloth strips to Ratatoskr, and sat by a dead sister. "Thank you." Ratatoskr released the pressure she had maintained on Eugen's arm and wrapped strips of cloth around the entrance and exit wounds. "It's lucky that the dagger only damaged the left arm. You'll be able to fence or practice fencing." "Without a shield?" Eugen asked. "Stop moaning. You don't need a shield while practicing." Ratatoskr tied a knot to keep the bandages in place. "I'll check your arm in the morning. If it looks bad, we'll wash the wounds and try again. I don't think you need stitches, but we'll see." "Maybe wash it out now?" Ratatoskr ignored him. "Dorothy." The young woman looked at Ratatoskr. "Yes? Are you up to a nighttime ride?" "I think so. The moon is almost full, and you have plenty of light along the way. You better take John with you. He's not much, but at night an enemy might mistake him for a warrior and hesitate before attacking the two of you. But not to worry. I doubt whether they've had any time to arrange a trap or ambush along the road to Fairmill, but you never know. We'll be as cautious as we can at this stage. Your father will want to know about Evelyn as soon as possible. Girardi stood and shuddered. I don't wish to be the bearer of such news, but if I have to. Eugen interrupted her. Why not send John? Why should Girardi have to make the ride? It's for her own safety, Ratatoska replied. Yes, no one is in the room now, but that does not mean the bad guys won't return. They could prepare better on the next attempt. I don't think they'll try again tonight, but they might. Stranger things have happened. She went over and hugged Girardi. I wouldn't ask you if it wasn't important. I'll send Eugen, but I need him here. Besides, you're a witness and can give your father a better report than John could. I'll go, but I want to lay out Evelyn's body first. I couldn't leave her like this, even if I lose an hour or two. That's good enough, Ratatoska said, and will help you. Now listen. Tell your father to send a messenger. Wait, better make that 2 messengers, at least to Hildy and Gare. The twins' father was Gerard, who everyone called Beard, and who lived in Fairmill, the capital of Loweswater. The abbreviated war of the previous fall between Faringdale and Loweswater had ended with Hildy and Gare becoming the rulers of both countries, and Hildy had appointed Beard to oversee Loweswater. Hildy and Gare will want to know as soon as possible what has happened, and also what is beginning to happen. The first step for your father is to search Fairmill. Yes, I'm confident that's the most likely place. The other end of the link to Jolsvin's workroom. But recommend caution to him. Our visitors will probably have made their escape from Fairmill already, but maybe your father will get lucky. He'll come across someone wounded by a dagger, or find blood in an unexpected place. If he's lucky, he'll find a body with one of my daggers in it. Here, take this. Ratatoska gave a dagger to Girardi. That should match what Beard will hopefully find. That should be all the proof he needs for tonight. Who is Beard supposed to be looking for? Eugen asked. Haven't I told you? Ratatoska waited a few seconds, but Eugen's face remained blank. I'd like to know too, Girardi said. Ratatoska looked from one to the other. Thora, of course. Who else but Rogville's younger daughter, the one who Rogville promised to Jolsvin if all their plans worked out. I suspect that Thora and Jolsvin were already familiar with one another. Jolsvin must have taught her magic, which explains the link between here and somewhere else in Fairmill. The first obvious place for Beard to check is everywhere that Thora has been lodging. More than likely she has a secret place from which she visited Jolsvin without anyone knowing about the visits. So she is dangerous, Eugen said. Well, that's obvious. I bet that Thora has advanced far enough along the way from becoming a beginner to being a fully qualified wizard, without anyone suspecting the truth of the matter. And as for being dangerous, put Thora on top of the list. She has much to be angry about. Jolsvin, her lover, killed. A brother and sister killed. And her father and mother, for all practical purposes, prisoners in Pinehaven. She wants revenge. Okay, Eugen said. She has the motive, skill, and the means. But why now? Why has Thora waited all these months after the fighting between Faringdale and Loweswater stopped? Ratatoska shook her head. I wish I knew, but from a practical standpoint the answer doesn't matter. We have to stop Thora before she causes more upheaval and deaths. She sighed. Life had settled down. Maybe a little too settled, but peace is better than war. Okay, enough chat. Let's get started. I don't think that Thora is as prepared as she'd like to be. Something went wrong here, and we may stop her before she's too well underway. Have you ever met Thora? Eugen asked, rather Tosca. No, Drosvin was too discreet. He could be very sly. So how do we recognize her? Ideally, she has a dagger through her heart, and Beard will find her. And if she doesn't have a dagger sticking out of her? I've heard her described as a strawberry blonde, and she'll make her presence known one way or another. Thora won't keep hidden because she needs allies, and we'll find her through them, or through her actions. Eugen hated to keep asking questions, but they saw no alternative. How do we begin? We'll help Girardi carry Avalon to her room, and then we'll search the workroom and try to figure out how much is missing. I doubt whether they took as much as they wanted. They were interrupted. What we have to do is get rid of anything of magic that could be useful to them. Eugen frowned. I was hoping for an early night's sleep, with my arm and all that. I need my rest. Not tonight, dear. By dawn we'll be going to Hildy and Gare, ourselves, to give them a complete warning and all the facts we know. We have to discuss and make plans before the worst can happen. They haven't been ruling the combined Faringdale and Loweswater very long, and anything could upset the balance of their power. You don't believe that everyone is content with those two in control. Other nobles want what they consider their proper share, which doesn't include our friends. And in addition to all that, Thora wants her inheritance, Loweswater, as well as revenge. I guess that she thinks our inn, Drolsvin's Tower, by rights belongs to her. How do we get rid of his possessions? Eugen asked. We talked about burning everything, but you decided that it was too dangerous letting loose all that magic. Ratatoska patted him on his good arm. Don't worry. I have a plan to get rid of Drolsvin's stuff once and for all. I only regret that we haven't done so before. It means a little lead work, but that won't bother your arm. She smiled at Eugen. You'll benefit from the exercise. And so ends Chapter 1 of Thora's Dagger. Thank you for listening and watching.